Hi, welcome with Rick DiClemente to the Astrology Unplugged show. Tonight, episode number 97. And I did miss a couple, and I want to let you know this is mostly an astrology show, but every other now and then we go off and talk to people in related fields. Tonight, our guest is Stephen Poplin, very famous, popular regressionist. Next week will be Astrology 927. She's with us tonight, the Reverend Kim Wilson, she's up in Maine? No, she's back in Texas. She's a Texas gal. She's a Texas gal. She is I'm going to force her to. We're going to talk about down to earth. What the hell does this Course in Miracles stuff mean? Because it's a very complex subject, and that's why I like her, because she's got that ability to come out with a big head trip and talk to you on that level. Then I'm so thrilled, back to back, on our 100th week anniversary, I will be having the wonderful Nick Arandes as host. He's written one of the most powerful books I've ever read, called What Happens When You Let God, or What Happens When You Let Go. And it's such a marvelous book. He is a brilliant Virgo. He's a former stand-up comic. So if it turns sour, we'll have him tell us some jokes. And he plays guitar, so maybe we'll sing for us. But nevertheless, he's really, really good at explaining to you down to earth, what does this mean about letting go? What do you do? We're hearing this from a Virgo. And in the background, you keep hearing our cat sneeze, because we just can't get this cat better. He gets better, then she gets worse. So we're working on it. Anyhow, he will be with us for 100th anniversary, talking about his new, whatever he's up to now. He travels all over the planet, especially Latin America. Then it's going to be interesting. On October 18th will be Liza and yours truly. We're going to talk about all the following of all along of Pluto into Capricorn since 2008, and we've been writing about it since 2005. We're going to talk about what has happened before, during, and after, what's coming, and the introduction of what Eris brought with it, which is like where she sure came along at the right time. So that will be evening. Then around November 1st, we will have Melody Winery with us, who's here tonight, Gina Mazza with us, and Linda Platt, who will be with us later from Pittsburgh, English professor from Pittsburgh, talking about the implications of Eris being here now, and Eris is fed up. And that's your Me Too movement, and that's just part of it. But I want to get right to the point here. I'm so thrilled that 18 years ago, I was living just above Northern Maryland. I got lucky enough to get a regressive hypnosis session with Stephen Poplin, our guest tonight. Stephen is now living in Ames, Iowa. But I want to say he's got his 2 books out now, and let me see if I can. Book number 2 has just come out, so I'm just reading it. It's very much like a continuation of book number 1, and it's all about casework of people on their travels between lifetimes, their discussions, their memories, etc. And I've got to tell you, from having a recent one years ago, I've got to tell you, when you work with Stephen, it's a remarkable experience, because Stephen can sense where you're at. He doesn't guide you or force you. Da-da-da! Here she is. She's the one that's not feeling well. This is Uma. Come on, Uma. Everybody sends you good vibes. Okay. Anyhow, but Stephen is remarkable because he's not trying to make a big deal of himself. He's working with you. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it, because I don't care. I've been at this a long time. I've been at this since 82 with my own show. Stephen's the real deal. And I'll tell you what, being a radio host, it's a drag to have the wrong person on. It's a drag. Because I'm not here to pump people's egos up. I'm not. Stephen's not that. Stephen's the real deal, and he's a real spiritual leader. And welcome aboard. I'm so glad to have you back.
Thank you very much, Rick. That's really great. Yeah, nice to be back.
Well, Stephen, you are so welcome. I really don't know where to start. I have a lot of ideas. I'm sure you're really close to it. When you write a book, you get sick of it because you go over it so many times. I understand that. But tell us, there's got to be a basic difference between the two books. And the book 2 just came out, right?
That's right. It was in May.
What's the difference between the two?
One has a blue cover. The other one has a violet cover.
That's a real good answer.
So I introduce with the volume 1 the general background, taking a look at a historical perspective, looking at different religions, how different philosophies, different religions have approached this subject of reincarnation. So partly it's, to address maybe someone who really know so much about it, or might even be semi-skeptical about past lives or reincarnation. And so I'm, that educational part is really striving to explain a lot of things. And then I go into some of the interesting themes that have come up over these many, many years, including relationships, what kind of relationships, what about karma, the cause and effect sorts of things in life, and then what is this all about? What is this spiritual journey? Also introduce the work of Michael Newton, who wrote Journey of Souls, and he did some great work in, again, hypnotizing his clients and patients, and then asking them, where do you go when you are not in a past life? And I've had, even before I came across his book, which was in the year 2000, he reminded me of some of my clients who also, had a past life regression. And then they, of course, after death, you leave the body, you continue your journey. And then sometimes it was a matter of, now I am in a great room. There's something like a wall nearby, and there are many orbs or lights or columns who are familiar to me. Oh, this one particular orb comes up to me. I think it's my mother. And so I've had experiences like that, and then it was really great to come across the work of Michael Newton, who then expanded that and basically described heaven.
Wow.
I'd have to say.
One thing I wanted, go ahead, but good.
Yeah. And then I also include some of the ideas of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. And that's going to be part of the subject and the focus this evening, when I take a look at what Edgar Cayce had to say about where, again, do we go when we're not upon the earth? And what is this all about? Why are we here in the first place? And what are the lessons to be learned? How are we supposed to go about this thing called living upon the earth?
Why did you get so fascinated to spend many years at the Cayce Foundation years ago?
Yeah. Well, I could say that I had a mystical experience basically in 1979. And I was inspired to come back to the United States, because I was again in Europe. I was in England at the time, and came back, and then had this kind of a draw, like a voice that said, if you're actually looking for more wisdom, if you want to understand more about what's going on, then, accidentally, synchronistically, a book about Edgar Cayce and his ideas fell into my lap at just that 1 month period of time, when I was kind of saying, okay, where's next? I'm back in the United States, so what should I do now? And then there it was. I got this blast of lightning, and said, I'm going to go to Virginia Beach. And I ended up staying there for about 9 years.
Wow. I've been there. It's a magical place.
It is.
One thing I want to ask you before we start, and I got your graphics already, and I'm going to display them while I talks about them, and I'll give you the URL if you would like to download that graphic to your machine, to your printer. You can get it off my website, which I'll show you in a minute. But here's a question I have for you that I think you've probably run into many times. People going under and people being regressed. It's a natural fork in the road, I think, for everybody to wonder, am I accessing something in my past life, or am I just using my imagination? And I learned that, boy, that's a deadly argument. And so I just learned that they're probably the same thing. So I know my recent session with you, I just started following my imagination, because it's not coming from nowhere, it's coming from somewhere. And that's what's so good about Stephen. Stephen, he can tell if you're onto something. He can tell what's important, what's possibly important, and he doesn't try to translate it for you, but he archetypally can sense what you're doing, and he can suggest things to you that kind of, he's a good tour guide. Very hard to explain. Just to let you know, and I'll get his document ready here in a second. I don't have his particulars ready. Stephen does prefer if you go to Iowa and get your reading done in person, and that makes sense. He and I did it over the internet, and it worked out okay, but get in your cars and drive to Ames, Iowa. Okay. All right. Now.
Or meet me in Europe in the summer.
When?
Meet me in Europe in the summer.
Oh, yeah. Go to Austria. Meet him there. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Let's take a look at what else we got ready for you. Okay. Here is your, here is the Cayce link. Let me get that copied. So I'm going to share this for you. He is going to, he's going to talk about stuff that he downloaded somehow from Mr. Cayce, and you can use this link to get to that documents on my website. If you would like to get a copy of it yourself, do it in all lowercase. It's picky. Go to www.starself.com/back for backup /class/Cayce.pdf, and you will access the document that I'm just about to show you. And if you don't know this, there is a very famous book by this woman, I forget her name, on Edgar Cayce about astrology. So if you would like, what's her name?
Margaret Gammon.
Okay, and here, it's all yours. I'm going to put it on the screen, and you can take it away. This is the document. This is the document that you can get if you follow that link. So you let me know if you want me to scroll up or down.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Yeah, this handy-dandy little document I put together years ago. I've given some talks about Edgar Cayce and astrology, both at the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, as well as various other times when I was teaching astrology. I simultaneously had this interest in doing past life regressions and helping people to get in touch with the wisdom within. But as I said, at the same time, I was very fascinated with astrology. And so I found that the Edgar Cayce readings kind of fit in with both of these things that I find intriguing, because here was a man who really was I think he made it to the 8th grade. Tell me if I'm off with this, anybody who knows more about Cayce. But about the 8th grade, so, there in Kentucky, and this was how it was at that point. And he only basically read the Bible once per year, all the way through. And so some of his readings has a bit of a King James flair to it, because that's what he was reading. One of the things I like about Cayce, is that being relatively uneducated, he did not study astrology. He did not study philosophy. He did not, pay attention to a lot of these things that we are all studying quite hard. Here again is his chart here in front of you. He had his natural abilities, and he met a hypnotist when he had a physical problem. This guy took him into a trance state, and then after a while, he learned to take himself into a hypnotic trance and was able to give readings of all sorts of natures, mostly about healing, holistic healing. But then people started asking questions about spirituality, past lives, astrology, and so forth. And again, here is a person who really never studied any of that, but was able to connect with subconscious minds, universal wisdom, and basically channel information.
That's the Neptune.
Right. So there's that Neptune, very strong up there. Pluto, there at the top of his chart. And there is the psychic Uranus rising there in Leo. And that, to me, is like having an antenna to the divine wisdom right there. You can see it squaring Pluto up there in the 10th house.
Very powerful, yep.
And creates a dynamic.
It's a bucket pattern, too. So this Uranus is really powerful. That means he's way ahead of his time.
Way ahead of his time.
The sun is in the 8th house. And look at Venus. It's right next to Eris.
Mm-hmm.
Right next to Eris. And I thought you might enjoy seeing that.
He was thrown in jail a couple of times, by the way.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, practicing medicine without a license.
I'm not surprised. Let me get back to your document. Go ahead.
Okay. So he gave all these different readings, and then there were some people who said, could you please give us your horoscope? Could you please give us your time of birth? He had no idea, anything about astrology, as I said. And then they made this calculation that in March of March 19th, 1919, I think they might have been playing also with numbers and there too. They said that this would be an excellent day that you could give a reading, a psychic reading that could be of benefit to a greater wisdom. And so he said, okay, well, I'll just go ahead and do that then. And they asked him about various things. And I've got this reading here in front of me. It's Cayce reading 254-2. And he starts off with, and I find this rather interesting when he begins, we have the body here. We have it before. So this is him in a psychic state finding the body of Edgar Cayce. And then to say that, oh, we've had it before. It's like, it's so universal. It's not personal at all. And it's like a greater wisdom focusing intuitively, psychically upon this person lying down on a sofa who is in a trance state. And they say, oh yeah, we've been here before. We know this guy. And what an interesting way to start these things. Then he goes ahead and talks about how he works and that he tunes into his own subconscious mind. And I would be inclined to say that it might be the superconscious. At the time, I don't think they even used the word superconscious, but sub basically means you're leaving the conscious mind and going into an alternate perspective. And from there, he is in contact with other subconscious minds and being able to read information, wisdom, and notions from many, many people.
Let me say one thing about that to you folks. If you know a lot of Pisces people, and as you know, I'm very high on Pisces when I wrote that book, a lot of Pisces can't handle it. It's really hard to be a Pisces. It is. Because your normal ego is not supported. Most Pisces get very confused. They're not made to direct themselves through the world because there is no themselves. But I've learned, not in every case, when a Pisces tells you about a dream they had, when a Pisces tells you about a premonition they are having, don't toss it aside, even if they're quite flaky. Listen to it, because they do have extra antenna that reach the places that yours don't. They do. Give it a consideration.
And of course, with Edgar Cayce, being not only a Pisces sun, but there he had, of course, in his chart, he has that Venus, Saturn, Mercury, North Node, all in Pisces, in the 7th house, of course, giving readings, having one-on-one conversations with people who asked him particular questions, a classic 7th house sort of thing, but him getting then the universal consciousness from his sun shining in the 8th house, the mysterious 8th house. In that document, that PDF that you can take a look at and download, gives a real quick summary of the different planets.
What's that mean? What does this document mean about the planets?
Well, basically, from the Cayce perspective, a quick summary of the vibrations, the colors, the glands, the chakras connected with each of the planets. And then when you take a look at it from there, then go ahead and compare it with your own chart. And with some, let's say it will fill out some things that we already know about the planets, but sometimes it goes in a slightly different direction or gives a unique slant on what the planets mean. So I find it very interesting and useful to have yet this different Cayce perspective of looking and analyzing your own chart.
Is this you condensing your take on what he wrote about these planets from his book?
That's true.
Is that what it is? Well, I've often wondered, he used this terminology, the soul has never been in Neptune. That's the way he would put it.
That's right.
No,
That's
it's
right.
never been in Neptune. What does that mean?
Yeah. And he would also say the entity has been in the environs of 4 or 5 planets before it took its flight for birth upon the earth. Wow. So it's really fascinating ways of describing it. But by saying that it wasn't in Neptune, then that soul in its last, let's say, cycle, or maybe a long time, if ever, it had been to the environ called Neptune, it actually hadn't gone there. It had been perhaps to Uranus, Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter, and then that entity, that soul, was born into the earth, having skipped Neptune, as it were. And these are universal vibrations, as I said, also connected with colors, music, tones, melodies, but a place where souls can, let's say, attune to the vibrations of the specific planets. You will, as ongoing astrologers, you'll recognize, of course, pretty much all of the major things connected to Mercury, Venus, Mars, and so forth. The big surprise I find is with Saturn. And Saturn is almost like the opposite of what we as astrologers pay attention to or would describe, because it represents changes. And it took me actually quite a few years to try and figure out exactly what that meant. The other interesting dynamic connected to Saturn, recognizing that we as souls, when we leave the earth body, we go to the spirit world, and that is sometimes a nebulous place that people describe when they're having these journeys. But according to Cayce, we can go to these dimensions or environments connected to the planets. And so we may be sent or even banish ourselves to the vibration of Saturn because we got out of hand. We become calcified in a particular manner, and Saturn shakes things up so that this will be the place that we change. So with that as an interpretation of one's chart, you would then take a look at Saturn, and this is the place that needs to have changes, whether that be in Mars, in Taurus or Gemini or Cancer or wherever your Saturn happens to be. This is the place where you're supposed to break out of some sort of calcification or being stuck because it got out of hand. And that, as I said, seems to be opposite of what people think about with Saturn when we say, oh, well, this is, the taskmaster where we're going to be focusing and consistency and long-term goals and things like that. That is absolutely almost the opposite of what Cayce says. So my interpretation on that is Saturn is the place where we are dragging our feet. This is where we do not want to move. We do not want change. And therefore, we must change. We are going to get our butt kicked if we don't change right there.
Well,
and so
what a point. What a point.
That's a different slant, eh?
Yeah, it's amazing. I got to go through all my files now. Yeah, that puts a different light on everything.
It really does.
We're dragging our feet.
Exactly. And then the soul banishes itself to Saturn because we have been stuck in a particular way of thinking. We are getting a little bit too cozy with a particular narrow-minded thinking. And so this is the place where we have to change.
I think that one of the reasons, I'm projecting here, I think one of the reasons that Saturnian people would drag their feet is because they imagine they make a mountain out of a molehill. They just think the work they're going to have to do is going to be so immense. It's got to be so well done. It's got to be so perfect. God's going to look at it with spectacles, and I think that's one reason they get scared and they get rigid and they freeze up. I think because I've always said that Saturn is the same as the words make sure. Saturn is where you're making sure. So how are you going to make sure and drag your feet at the same time? Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think some people just make it so big that they can't perceive how they can possibly succeed, and they just freeze. Does that make sense to you?
Yep. And that freezing is what's going to slow us down because we have to keep on moving. We have to keep on growing. We have to keep on expanding and learning. And so we cannot stop. We have to continue to grow and thrive. So back to that first reading he did in 1919, someone asked him then, do the planets have anything to do with the ruling of the destiny of men? If so, what? And what do they have to do with this body? And he answers and says, they do. In the beginning, as our own planet, Earth, was set in motion, the placing of other planets began the ruling of the destiny of all matter as created, just as the division of waters was and is ruled by the moon and its path about the earth. Just so as in the higher creation, as it began, is ruled by the action of the planets about the earth. The strongest power in the destiny of man is the sun first, then the closer planets, or those that are coming in ascendancy at the time of birth of the individual.
That means rising up on the left side of the chart.
That's right. I have found that sometimes he used the word zenith in that respect at later times, which we would normally think about for the midheaven.
Right.
Sometimes it was interchangeable with him, and it might have been more of the meaning of zenith, coming to ascendancy, as compared with a mathematical or geographical point. And so those planets around the ascendant and midheaven, which means first house, 12th house, 9th house, 10th house, those, according from the Cayce perspective, these you would pay closer attention to. Then he says, after talking about the sun and the moon, let it be understood here, no action of any planet or any of the phases of the sun, moon, or any of the heavenly bodies surpass the rule of man's individual willpower. The power given by the creator of man in the beginning when he became a living soul with the power of choosing for himself.
How did he resolve through, I know that he was told later in life he was a maniac reader doing all the health readings for around the world and letters from everybody around the world. And he was told he better only do 2 a day. He's going to wear himself out. He still did 7 a day until he did wear himself out. But how did he ride out his last several years in terms of what did he feel he had accomplished? What did he feel his real duty on earth was?
You know, in a classic interplanetary vibration person, very psychic, and of course all of the Pisces influence, he was there of service. You know, it was, you know, to better his fellow man. He was there to give and to share, and he had a tough time saying no. And there were several times when he could have benefited himself and perhaps made a lot of money, which was given in one of his readings. You might be very rich or very poor. And he was so much into the service of things that that became number one for him, to the point where, again, he just gave so much that he ran out of juice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to ask you, like, coming from my way of astrology and A Course in Miracles and David Hawkins, it's become clear to me that they all add up and going back to God in some fashion. That has to be the same discovery and ultimate destination that Cayce found too. But how did he resolve that with his Christian upbringing?
You know, that's an interesting thing, because he was a Sunday school teacher. And as I said, didn't get very far in his own personal education. And he just read the Bible once per year in all of his adult life. So he was a very devout Christian. And when he was first doing the readings for, I think it was like 1903 or something like that, he was being sought after at that point. And most of them were health readings. And of course, with health readings, you know, you are not in conflict with any religion per se. But it wasn't until, like I said, he had this significant reading inspired by astrologers in 1919. But it wasn't until 1923, so, you know, quite a few years, 20 years, that he had already been giving these readings, that he started giving what was called life readings. And these were those connected with the sojourns of the soul, life influences, astrological influences, and our divine missions. And so on a philosophical perspective. And he was a bit freaked out about what was coming through his mouth. He didn't remember a lot of what he said. But so he almost gave up doing these types of readings. But then there was a general consensus of the people who were talking to him that said, actually, we actually are quite fascinated with this. We like what you're doing, and we'd love to have you continue. And so he was then convinced that, okay, I'll go ahead and continue to do these types of readings.
You, I know you've been doing reading sessions for a long time. In the same time period, I've been doing a lot of astrology, and I'm definitely noticing people have really changed. People have really changed their way of being, their knowledge. What are you finding?
You mean when people study astrology?
No, I'm talking about people's general sense of, I'm creating my world, I'm responsible for my world. In the 50s, they wouldn't even understand what that meant. Even in the 80s, they didn't understand it. People are becoming more aware. Now, I would imagine that parallels with what you're doing with people under regression. What are you finding with people that they're getting it more? When I say getting it more, that means they're blaming other people less.
Right.
What are you finding? What have you found?
We've been listening here here in 2016 about the millennials, And these young people who are really, have woken up, and many of them were Bernie fans and so forth. There's a lot of young people who are really sparking some really great stuff also in Europe, and I assume in other places of the world too. And I take a look at this very rare, interesting alignment of Uranus and Neptune in the 1990s, in the mid-90s. And this, as you may know, only happens once every 170 years. And the first time they aligned was in the 1820s. And there was find out how many new independent countries came to be in the 1820s. All across South America, there was a revolutionary inclinations and countries going towards independence. Well, again, in the 1990s, how many new individual countries, broke out of the Soviet Union? I believe that it was a very powerful alignment in which, not only those two, three. It was. The fall of the Soviet Union was really quite big. Saturn was involved with that too, all going in Capricorn, where again, governmental changes, but also practical changes from the Cayce perspective, as well as from other sources of astrology. Uranus representing technology and electronics, and how things can be, let's say, hardwired or even software connected with this type of technology, joined forces with Neptune, which is the visionary, which has the visual, which has the inspiration, has more of a soft perspective. And here we are right now looking at each other from various places in the United States, with the wonderful World Wide Web that was truly expanded in the 1990s, and what we're dealing with right now. Uranus and Neptune coming together in a very practical Capricorn, and this is the result that we have at this moment.
I would imagine that people that are going under with you, they're believing more of their story, as opposed in the old days, they may have thought it was more of a novelty.
That's true. That's true. Sometimes a general curiosity, but there's also a lot of people who have been coming with me with mysterious ailments, things that their doctors couldn't figure out.
Is that right?
Psychosomatic illnesses, things that, everybody has kind of given up on, or it could be even simple sort of, panic attacks, fears, somebody here from the Midwest who's afraid of the great ocean. Well, and they've never been to the ocean. I mean, how does that happen? So they start asking these questions, that doesn't quite fit into their personal childhood issues. And so where did they come from? And then they start asking about past lives, and that's when they start knocking on my door. And of course, I have these two different hats. I can, hypnotically take people into their past lives, but I'm also an astrologer and have been a professional astrologer since the early 80s. And so, if there is even some sort of block that someone might have, or they're afraid of going into a trance, or they don't trust what this hypnosis stuff will do, then we can take a look at the chart and find out some information there.
Well, where are we now, Stephen? Because as you know, Mr. Saturn is in Capricorn, approaching Mr. Pluto, which is in Capricorn, and they're not even that close yet. And we know they're not like real whoop-it-up party types when they get together. And they're going to be right in about a year, I would say, a year and a half. What do you expect to happen when those two conjoin?
Well, the interesting thing, I'm going to keep on this Cayce topic, because as I said, he was giving readings, about these life readings and astrological perspectives a lot by the year 1923. And he mentioned Septimus and also Vulcan. And when Pluto was discovered in 1930, 7 years later, then Cayce said, yes, Septimus or Vulcan is Pluto. So he was talking about Pluto before it was discovered, which I find is really, again, quite fascinating. He talked about Pluto as being a planet of growth and a development in consciousness,
Mm.
that Pluto was still growing,
Mm-hmm.
or Septimus. By the way, Septimus is the 7th planet from the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
That word. But Vulcan, of course, is a wonderful a name that fits in quite nicely with Pluto, god of the underworld. But so the consciousness is where Pluto is going towards, and oftentimes Pluto gets the bad rap because people are afraid of that,
Yeah.
of what's going to be happening. And indeed, there are those who are connected to the mafia, to the underworld, and yeah, they are not going to play by the rules. They are not going to, be Mr. Nice Guy, and that can scare some people.
Well, we have seen Pluto, and we'll be talking about this in 2 weeks, Liza and I, about Pluto since January of 2008. Up until now, it's at 20 degrees. It's been operating rather largely by itself, except for those middle years. It was square to Uranus about 7 times.
Exactly.
So what do you
last 7 years it was doing that.
What do you expect in the next couple of years when it gets to 22 and Saturn catches up with it?
Mm-hmm. Right. There will be some changes. Remember that Cayce said Saturn connects with changes.
Okay, changes like what changes?
Political changes. There will be people who are in positions of power, and they will be ousted.
Mm-hmm.
Will be other people who will want to very quickly take the reins, because in Capricorn, those who are self-serving, those who want to run the show, will very quickly try to grab the reins.
Well, that's very good, and I want to let you know, I believe it's November 7th coming up, Election Day. I did a chart on that evening around, I think just before midnight, usually when the polls close and you know what's what. But that's a really beautiful chart. I want to give you some good feelings here. There's some hardship in it, but it's mostly good. I did it for Washington, D.C. For, I think, 10, 11 o'clock at night on Tuesday night, election night, and it looks really good. And what's so good about it is Jupiter's really rising, and it really means like the goodwill of the people is just fed up. And the fed up is not Uranus. The fed up is Eris. Right, Suzanne? The fed up is Eris. And maybe they're fed up together, but there's a lot of fed up going on. And,
and they should be.
We're going to have a good time. So we're going to open the phones a little bit while later so people can ask questions of you. What would you like to talk about, Stephen? What interests you?
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about, like the larger picture of our souls and our development and where are we going with all of this. And also some of the intricacies that I think all of your listeners will be fascinated with, helping them to, let's say, look at their charts in different ways. Cayce said that astrologically are planetary sojourns, where our souls go when we are not here upon the earth. Remember that souls have no problems going into suns, stars, planets, earth, and rocky shores and things like that, because it has no problems. All right, thank you. Wonderful, nice picture there. We have our planetary sojourns, and my feeling is that it's not the fact that, let's say, here in the sky is where you're going to find Jupiter or Mars, and that is the location that our soul is going to be hanging out for a period of time of learning and discovery. However, the planet is a representation of where we have gone. Okay? And so when I think of that, and Elka, I think you're not too far away here. I think you're listening too. You just got a really interesting journey over to, down the Rhine River. And so I feel that an analogy that we could probably use quite nicely is that when we, let's say, take a trip, down the Rhine, from the Netherlands on into Germany, it's similar to as our souls leaving the earth after death, going into Jupiter or Saturn or Venus, and then bringing back like snapshots and memories and lessons from Venus or Mars. Very similar to taking a trip, bringing back with them an enrichment of all the things that we learned. And this connects with what Cayce called the mental inclinations come from the planets. The emotional reactions to being in the body, including pleasure and pain, comes from past life incarnations upon the earth. Mm-hmm. So really knowing where these inclinations are coming from, and are we talking about your feelings, your emotions, your pleasure or pain connected to things that you do like about being here in the body, recognizing that we're talking about the senses, that can be connected with those past lives.
I think so.
Is those sparks, those mental inclinations, those aha moments, those inspirations, that oftentimes, according to Cayce, is coming from our planetary sojourns from these various places. So that's an interesting perspective. And then we're connected to the glandular centers or the endocrine system, and that are also called the spiritual centers or the chakras, and they are also connected to the planets. And very quickly, I can say that Mercury is connected to the pineal gland up here, and the color indigo. Here we go here, right? Say it, okay. Mercury, of course, with high mental abilities, curiosity, and it is a curious planet that has a special gift of being able to understand all the rest of the planets. It goes to them, and therefore having a very strong Mercury will make you quite clear about things in general. But imagine now a journalist or a reporter, and that goes quite nicely with Mercury. And Mercury has the ability of even understanding, let's say, Neptune or Saturn, because it can be the investigator or the journalist that takes that information and brings it to our consciousness. Venus is associated with the thymus gland, which is is close to the heart, and the color green. That is the heart chakra. Mars is connected to the adrenals and the color yellow, to Edgar Cayce. And he says that Mars can be mad, and it's okay to be mad, but just don't keep on with your temper. Learn to control it. Learn to focus your power of Mars energy. And of course, with adrenals, we talk very quickly about fight or flight adrenal activities and how appropriate that Mars is associated with that. Jupiter then is associated with the pituitary gland and the color violet. And he often talks about Jupiter being the expansive planets, ennoblement, interest in international perspectives, and on greater ideas, ideals, and themes. The pituitary, of course, is the master gland in the body and in the chakra system. Saturn is connected to the gonads and the color red. And I put an exclamation point on that because you just don't think of Saturn that way. You think that should be Mars, and Saturn should be black or brown at least. But again, I'm just going with what Cayce said and how Saturn really does shift when you take a look at the Cayce perspective. And when you think about now the gonads, this is that spark of life This is when things are, we go back to the individual single cells at this almost like a pre-life perspective, but that urge to merge, and here we have the color red, but talk about changes when one then becomes a parent, your life has definitely changed. Uranus is also very interesting, and this is a general perspective. I think also astrologers can benefit by paying attention to the Cayce perspectives. It's associated with the thyroid here in the throat area. And this, by the way, is the will center. And one can be very willful, or the opposite of that, because Uranus connects with the extremes. It could be a doormat, or it can be a controller, very willful. It's going to be one or the other. And by the way, Donald Trump has his sun conjunct Uranus. And this is the planet of the extremes. And Cayce says very often, many things can go awry for no apparent reason, and that there can be someone who could be very, very good or very bad.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, by the way, that I think about Uranus as the psychic planet, this connected to extremes, he says that sometimes people can be very morose or even depressed for no apparent reason, as the extremes going up, going down with this Uranian planet. And it's interesting to compare notes with many of the astrologers listening in, because I have been paying closer attention to that with bipolar disorder when Uranus is very strong, because of exactly what Cayce was talking about. And I have found that when Uranus is aligned or conjunct the moon, the feelings, the emotions can indeed be expanded and extremist. And I have found quite a few manic depressives with a Uranus moon conjunction.
And in the past couple of days,
other people have found out.
Past couple of days, we've had Uranus opposite Venus with a T-square to Mars. All very tight, within 1 degree. And as soon as Monday night came at 9:30, Mars moved into 0 degrees, and the Venus and the Uranus were all within 1 degree. So a lot of people got a electric kick in the butt on Monday and Tuesday, and that's exactly why.
That sounds like a rave party.
Yeah, it was a wave party. Okay, and you want Neptune next.
Neptune, the mystic planet, the mysterious one.
My favorite.
To large bodies of water. It is connected to the reproductive cells of Leydig, which a lot of people don't know about. It's the second reproductive glands connected to, or next to the gonads. And it's with the color orange, which is an interesting color with Neptune. And so this, again, points with a slightly different perspective that there is this inspirational, creative dynamic with Neptune, and it wishes to reproduce, as it were. Those are the chakras. Pluto's not connected necessarily to a chakra, but as I said, it was fascinating that he had described it before it was discovered in 1930. It is connected to the growth, and what he said, one has to watch out for self-centeredness with Pluto, and this, of course, is the bugaboo of Pluto. And with this upcoming Saturn-Pluto alignment, we're going to be, the self-centered people are going to be front and center.
Saturn's not going to allow it.
Yeah, it's going to create those changes again.
It's not going to allow it.
Yeah, he said to beware of wrath and grudges. And he advised people with strong Plutos to stay attuned to the love force. It's kind of like as an antidote, as it were.
I would say the Old Testament is rather Plutonic.
Oh, yeah, yeah. well as
The vengeance of God.
with Abraham, he's going to sacrifice his son. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that is, again, kind of like a quick tour through the planetary centers associated with many of the chakras, and some of the other things connected to, like Venus and Mars and Jupiter. We as astrologers, we will find nothing so different there. But with some of the outer planets, with Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, things now have a slightly different shift from the Cayce perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to open the phones here in a few minutes so people can ask your correct questions directly to Stephen. I was wondering, because I'm myopic, I'm just into astrology, what do your clients say to you when you get those letters a couple months later on? Say, thanks, Stephen, that was a great reading, and because of that reading, I now can what?
You know, many times people will be coming to me, and probably many professional astrologers, when they're having a crisis or they're about to have a crisis. And so they are looking for support. They're looking for answers. They are uncertain about some things. And the meat and potatoes questions, of course, are relationships, money, and career. And you got to know about stuff like that, you know, because those are the buttons that are being pushed, and things that people truly, really want to know about. And so when they come back later, they may have that job. And I deal with also a lot of students. You know, I'm living in a university town right now, and I've always been associated with colleges and universities. And so people who are wanting to find out, what should they study? What should their career be? What sorts of things would be fitting into their personal contribution in life, which is an interesting perspective, because when people take a look at the 10th house or the 6th house, oftentimes you're thinking about my job, my career, how can I earn a living? But sometimes your contribution to society may be found in those two houses, and you may not get a lot of money from it.
Yeah.
It is a personal, satisfying thing you can give to your community, to your family, and to the world. And it is actually now a problem in our society that is a little bit too focused upon money in capitalism, because if we had, let's say, a different society with different priorities, I think a lot more people would feel fulfilled moving towards their personal contribution and how they would like to give to their families, to their world.
I've had a lot more success in the last 5 years because that question is so common. It used to be number one was relationships. Not anymore. Number one is life direction. People want to know their life direction. And I used to think, if I got a cancer in front of me, I need to give them a cancer type of job, such as what? Such as working with children. Yeah. Look for that. Yeah. If I have a Virgo, maybe towards construction or towards the nursing field. But I definitely have found out that I was wrong. I have found much more specificity and truth when I go looking at each person's individual early trauma. When I find their trauma at age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that trauma has shaken them up so bad in most people's cases that fuels them. And such as rape, and they want to go work in a rape center, or such as daddy's beating up mommy and I want to go work with anti-violence, or whatever it is. It can be many things. And I find a lot of truth by looking at the ascendant and the nadir to find life direction. Oh, I did want to mention one thing before I forget it, because I think this is very much good news. There are a lot of people that have asked me through the years for some good astrology software, and when they see the $350 price tag on the software I use, Solar Fire, they get kind of nervous. I want you to know there's a new product out by the same company called Spark, and it does a basic chart. It does a couple charts, and it's by Solar Fire, and it costs $75.
Okay, very good.
You can go to Astrolabe, Labe.com, and look up their brand new product. It runs on Windows 10 machines and some other Windows machines called Spark, and you can get yourself a light. It's like Astro Solar Fire Light. Okay, I'm going to leave the tape running because Mr. Stephen could just talk to us about, till we all turn blue, about all kind of subjects because he's just so bright. I'm going to ask you, please, we have a super guest here. Ask your questions directly to him and about his career, about his life, and just raise your hand and I'll pop you on if you got a question for Stephen Poplin. What do you know? I couldn't believe Elkie would go first. Oh my God. Go ahead, Elkie.
Sorry. How many planets do you have in the 8th house, Stephen?
I have none.
Okay.
If I pay attention to the Earth, and I do, then the Earth is in the 8th house.
Okay. So where does your...
But I'm a Scorpio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's got a lot of Jupiter in his chart. He's very Jupiter-Uranian in his 9th house, and that shows his love of the world and traveling and learning, and he's an incessant student. You know, he's sucking things up.
I'm going to give you a call. So.
Okay, remember his website is transpersonal.us. Thank you, Miss Karen. You're on with Stephen Poplin.
I have just a real quick question. You said that you would discuss karma and how that fits into all this.
Yes.
That's something I'd really like to know because I've heard so many conflicting things.
Yeah. Karma is very important, very interesting, and I talk a lot about it in my 2 books. And how it goes back to the Hindu perspective of cause and effect. And Cayce again talks about it as the universal law. What you reap, you shall, what you sow, you shall reap. You give, you receive. You cause harm, then harm will come to you. You do good, good will come back to you. This is the cause and effect. And the interesting thing, when you bring it back into, let's say, a non-esoteric perspective, thing works on this action dynamic. And that's what karma means. It means action. What have you put your energy towards? And so, if you go to the gym and you go to an aerobics class, you are putting some action into your muscles. And when you do that, you're going to have a more toned body. Your muscles are going to grow. It's a very simple, everyday meat and potatoes look at karma. When you pay attention to, let's say, a new skill, a talent, you want to learn an instrument, you want to do some painting, photography, whatever talent you wish to express, you put time and energy into that. That's action. Then you will, of course, become a better artist, a better painter, a better singer, a better musician, and so forth. And on now a esoteric level, then the things that you have planted in your life will come back to you in a later life. So those people who, let's say, are born musicians or born linguists, we have like the famous Mozart question, very likely I would guess that person put a lot of time and energy into music in a previous life before Mozart. And then you come in, revved up and ready to go. The same thing goes then with also relationships. You sow what you will then later reap. And there's been some really interesting case studies, and I have got quite a lot of interesting case studies in my books, that really tells the tale. And for instance, people who were enemies in a past life, to the point one took the life of someone else in a past life, that person, this life, might be the mother or father of that very same person.
Wow.
You took a life, and then you have to give a life. And the kind of the difficult dynamic of that is that a parent and a child may have been in a past life mortal enemies. That would explain, by the way, a lot of family dynamics as well as statistics, in that where do the most homicides focus upon? The family. It's very personal in situations like that, and it permeates so many different things. The interesting things that I also have learned over the years. Imagine now one of those slow motion pictures, moving pictures, where you see the different shades of self as you move across, and picture. You got the idea that I'm talking about here. That is a picture of the Akashic records. The Akasha is where we have left our imprint in time and space.
Wow.
Therefore, this picture that we can take with our modern technologies, with these motion pictures here, where you see that person in the past, we have left our impression in space. And then even with this recording that we have right now, although we've been sitting here for an hour, we're going to be going elsewhere, and we will be placing our material bodies in a different place. But always, time and place, we have been here, right here together for these moments.
That answer your
records.
That answer your question, Karen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Suzanne has a question for Stephen.
Hi, Stephen. I just want to know what you think of the reincarnation framework, that when somebody in a lifetime experiences extreme sorrow or harm, that doesn't necessarily mean in a past life it's directly related to something they did negative. They might have to relive it to master their own trauma. And so that's what I learned from some of my teachers and some of the mediumship that I do. It's the same way in a current lifetime. I study trauma on the master's level. So many times women who had a father who was very abusive will marry abusive husbands. They're trying to work it out. They're trying to master it. And some people believe in reincarnation, that can happen lifetime to lifetime. So just because somebody may be raped or come from an abusive childhood, it doesn't necessarily mean they deserved it through this karmic cycle. There's a lot of gray areas, maybe, I've learned, and I don't know how you feel about that framework of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yes, again, in my books, I approach that in a couple of different ways, and it is rather complex and very interesting. When we just take a look at the karma perspective, cause and effect, then if someone had been an abuser, a perpetrator in a past life, then they may be a victim in this life. You have to feel the other side of it. But that's indeed just one perspective, one side of it. And there are sometimes influences by those entities. And I imagine with your studies, Suzanne, that you have come across those entities. And almost like a part-time job that I have is to find out which sorts of entities or lost souls happen to be too close to my clients, and the other traumas, sorrows, fears, not connected to the personality that I'm working with, but someone who is this close to you is having such traumas, such sorrows. And it's so close that the person might be confused, thinking, oh, that's coming from me. It's this close. And so a remedy that I use, I assume that you have already heard about this, I ask for an angel. I ask for a guardian angel to please come down and escort this lost soul, take that soul, please, back to the light, back to home. Because obviously that person, disincarnate, a ghost, as it were, is seeking the light, seeking warmth. And my client is a light. My client has got that flame that is fascinating to one of these lost souls. So that's yet another dynamic, and I've got a couple of interesting stories in my books about that. But there's yet another one that I find very interesting. We, of course, have young souls, middle souls, older souls, and I have come across some older souls who come in to play the victim in a life as a sacrificial lamb, as it were, in order to wake up this aggressive person. And many times it is very emotional when almost at the point of death. And again, as I said, I've got a couple of these really intense examples in my book. When there is that death and they look at each other in the eyes, and then that perpetrator, that person who's got his hands around the neck of this person, looks into the eyes, and there is like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? And there is then a wake up, but sometimes that rather advanced soul, of course, loses that life. But that was the purpose, to sacrifice one's life so that someone else will wake up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Stephen, I definitely want to get an appointment with you, so I'm definitely going to do that through your website. I have a very, very interesting chakra photograph that a local person with a clinical PhD degree took. I have 3 heads. I have the dog's head in my 8th chakra. Albert Einstein looks like him, and then I'm right in the middle, and she interpreted it as I live in the past, present, future. And then I just laughed. Oh, am I going to be a dog in my next life? You know? So I want to connect with you and do some work with you and show you that.
Very good. Very, very interesting. Yeah, I've got several animal stories in my books too. And in my practice, I come across the souls of animals and pets. And I believe that many pets are here as emissaries. They're coming in with a message for the greater animal souls who really don't have a voice.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Rick.
That's because it's muted. Have you ever worked with a person who is attached to a negative entity, and you start working with them and the negative entity shows up as a 3-ring circus and is not happy that you're there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What happens with that?
There's some times when they wanted me out of the picture. And sometimes people will experience semi-calamities or accidents on the way to the,
Yeah, right.
From
Wow.
just kicking and screaming, does not want me there. There's been also a couple of times, and I was, I was a bit surprised myself that I start with what I think is a past life regression, and it gets very specific, going to, let's say, France, 1700s, and here I am. I'm a woman, and I'm now next to a water. And then a few minutes later, I find out that is not a past life of my client. That is a past life of the ghost who is next to my client. Oh, wow. My goodness.
I don't know how you find your way around the signpost so easily, but there's a real sense that when one is with you, it's a comforting feeling that you do know your way around. Because I've had regressions by different people, and yours are just tip-top. Next person, have a question for Stephen, please. Just raise your little finger. Waldo down in
Marilyn has her hand up.
well, get to Marilyn next. I don't even see Marilyn.
I see her.
Oh, there she is. Marilyn, you'll be next, please.
And
Waldo,
Reverend Tim, you've got my book, I see.
Waldo's down in he's down in the Yucatan. So we got Waldo, then Marilyn and Erica. Go ahead,
Okay.
Waldo.
Yes, I just wanted to know what is your perspective, because I noticed the Edgar Cayce talk about Pluto be the spiritual growth planet, the planet of spiritual growth and development. And I'm very curious about, since Pluto was not discovered yet, was he channeling this part of what we're living right now with Pluto being in the front scene? What do you think about why he was talking about being Pluto, the spiritual growth planet, and he was a spiritual person, so kind of more like Christian type of spirituality, but Pluto considered right now for us, the astrologers or the people that study astrology, especially the evolutionary astrologers, consider Pluto the same way. What do you thought about that? Because I'm very curious that he was already putting Pluto as the most important planet. If it's a spiritual growth, this is your spiritual development, and he was a spiritual man, why he was channeling that force?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Of course, Cayce would say that the sun would be stronger than Pluto, and beyond that, the willpower, our individual will, is stronger than any planet. So there is certainly a hierarchy there. I take a look at Pluto, and when it was discovered, 1930, and I've given this talk a couple of different times about the discoveries of the last three big planets, Neptune and Pluto. And I have this image that I describe that at the year that the planet is discovered, you get this image of that nice tranquil piece of water and that drop that comes down into the water, and then you see the circle. So here's the drop, and the round circle, the orb, the sphere is that. And Pluto was that planet in 1930. And here we had the Great Depression. It was also during the time of the Prohibition. And so we had the underworld, the mafia coming into control. And then when I take a look at that trough, with that image that I just described of those concentric water things, we've got some waves on two sides of not only the discovery of Pluto, but I can tell you later or at some other point about Uranus and Neptune. But we've got two world wars on either side of Pluto being discovered. So talk about some serious stuff going on with Pluto. The First World War and the Second World War, which, by the way, I don't think of them as two world wars. I think of them as part one and part two, one world war. And Pluto is right there in the middle of it all. And so you've got to give some respect to Pluto for sure.
Eris was zero Aries in 1921.
Okay, yeah. And the Roaring Twenties, we're starting off at that point too. Lots of individual freedom and so forth. But so there is this really interesting dynamic that Pluto asks us to go beyond our everyday sense of right and wrong, our individual ethical sense of what would the law say? What would be justice here? And I'm reminded of how the Chinese, in their major question, philosophical question, is a hurricane just? And humans would, of course, want to put a good bad slant on that, because a hurricane comes in, and a hurricane is coming in as we speak, and there will be damage. People will die. But is it because the hurricane is bad? The hurricane is air and water and a lot of power, and we can fight against it. We can gnash our teeth. We can raise our fists and so forth. But that water, that wind, that cyclone is coming in, and we just have to deal with it. And I think of Pluto in another sense. It is humans trying to put a good bad slant on things. And Pluto comes around and says, well, let's consider that. Let's take a look at this with renewed eyes. And there are some crime examples of Pluto in which we're talking about people who, kill someone. And then the very interesting and sometimes strange to many people, parent will stand up and say, and it might take some months, it might take some years, but they will say, I forgive you. Okay? And this is where the transformation comes in, I believe, with Pluto going very deep, that rearranges our sense of justice, rearranges our sense of right and wrong. And Pluto comes in and says, we are going to transform your perspective about your small human ideas of justice.
Thank you.
Well, not only is one way of looking at Pluto is you've seen plays where the character comes out on the stage at the end and they're metaphorically naked and they're right there and they're with you and they've got to make their move and they've got to be themselves and they've got to take ownership of their power. All the planets are spiritual, but only Pluto is the one that will escort you to the edge of the stage and then leave you.
Mm-hmm.
She will leave you because she wants to see what you can do. And that's why Pluto is tough, because Pluto is trying to tell you that you do have the strength. No, I don't. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. No, I don't. Yes, you do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the fight's all about. Thank you, Waldo. Next on the list is Marilyn. Marilyn, let me get you online with Stephen right now.
Okay, I have a question. I can't hear you.
I'm not talking.
Okay. I have a question, but maybe at the end, because it's the question I had. Many people think that David Wilcock is the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, but I don't want to get you off topic. I just wondered what your opinion of that was.
Well, I met David many years ago, and visually he could be related, to Edgar Cayce, and I believe he is a Pisces, and he started off doing more psychic things. But I don't have a sense one way or another, but I kind of doubt that he is the reincarnation, but I think that he has got some similar gifts.
He looks remarkably like him.
When you want to test the big boys, you're looking for the outer three planets near the angles, usually. You just don't get the big, powerful energy. Maybe conjunct the sun, maybe opposite the moon. But when you got the big boys right on the angles, that's when somebody's plugged in, like Dylan, or like the greats in history, like Shakespeare. That's why they're not concerned about your opinion. They're not being rude. They're just channeling. They're just channeling what that big planet's telling them. That's a very good question, Marilyn. Thank you very much. Next on our list is Erica. Erica, go ahead.
Hi.
What I wanted to ask was about astral projection. What experience, if any, do you ever run into with that when you are regressing people or hypnotizing them? And do you think that we project out of our bodies and travel every night when we're asleep?
Yeah, fascinating. I could truthfully say that my intent is to help people to astral project. I want to get them into a trance. I want them to leave their personality. I want them to connect with their soul, and let's take a trip. And there are some people who are, of course, much, quicker at doing that than others. It's a bit like, learning how to fly. And, some people might start off with a couple of jumps into the air, and other people can, turn into eagles and start soaring very quickly. When people really kind of lose their sense of being with me in the room, and they are so into the story, so into talking to their spirit guide, their soul family, spiritual dynamics, as well as going into the past, which is a little bit different than, let's say, a memory of the past, but they can go to their own akasha or psychic records, and that means that they are astral projecting into that place. The more that they are, let's say, emoting or feeling like, wow, this is so real, then the more that I think that they are truly leaving their body and having that trip. One of the interesting things that Cayce also says, that when we dream, we can contact at times a fourth dimension, which is Venus. He talks about also, here we are upon the earth, we are in the third dimension. And so if we're going to be a strict Cayceite, then we cannot be talking about, oh, we're shifting into the fourth or the fifth, because he makes an alignment with each of the planets connected to these different dimensions. And the earth is the third dimension. As long as we're here on this earth, we're going to be dealing with the third dimension. And what he says about that is also very interesting and makes you scratch your head, because one dimension is space, and that's what we typically think of with height by width by depth, and we think of that as space. But that's just one dimension. That is our space here. And so that's one dimension. The second dimension, according to Cayce, here is time. And so here we are using our bodies in time and space. And then the third dimension is patience.
Patience? What? Patience?
That'll make you think, huh?
That'll make you think.
Did you say patience?
I said patience.
Patience. As in wait, as in waiting patiently.
Yeah, that really makes you think. I've had to, because of that, and I came across that, years ago in the 1980s, that patience as a dimensional experience that we here upon the earth are confronting. Then I've had to really put patience way up there in my list of priorities to pay attention to. And one of the big things I've noticed is people who are very impatient. They're not quite getting the third dimensional experience. They're not really, graduating very well in the earth dimension.
Good point. Good point.
So that's discipline, right? That would be discipline.
Discipline will help one to be patient, but also in a kind of classic Buddha manner, just allowing things just to happen as they do. And when they come, they come. That's also patience. And you don't need really discipline with that. You just kind of like acceptance.
Very good. Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, Erica. Our final question tonight comes from Elke.
No, I just wondered, would it also have something to do with Saturn, the patience part?
To a certain extent, yes, because It's talking about changes in the place that we are being recalcitrant, the place that we're being stuck. But more often than not, Saturn moves more towards fear and fear of change, fear of moving and doing other things, which is why it's placed there in the chart, because that is where we must change, because we have to get unstuck.
But every planet has a higher dimension as well. You know, so Saturn has a higher dimension as well, and I associate that with patience.
Look at what happened to you during your Saturn return. We'll talk about change, huh?
That's right. Yeah. And many of us have our second Saturn return.
This is Stuart. Say bye-bye. Hey, it was wonderful tonight. Wonderful once again, Stephen. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you for your questions. Transpersonal.us is his website. Thank you for tuning in again. Tomorrow this will be up on YouTube, and I'll charge you 50 cents if you want to watch it. I'll take my coughing self and go elsewhere. Stephen, thank you once again. It was wonderful. Everybody, thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Rick.